Ever get that feeling that maybe underneath all the complex math of physics, there's something simpler hiding? Well, today we're diving straight into a perspective that says exactly that. That maybe we've built everything on a fundamental misunderstanding.
Yeah, and the source we're looking at, Everything We Thought We Knew, Reset by Motion Theory by Dave Champagne and 01, it doesn't just nudge things, it goes right for the foundations.
Right. It's proposing a complete reset.
Yeah.
For anyone following physics, this source is basically saying, hold on, what if the basic ingredients are wrong?
Exactly. It's not about tweaking equations, it's a conceptual overhaul. And, the promise is maybe untangling some really persistent knots in physics.
So think of this deep dive as getting a handle on a really radical idea fast. Because this motion theory, it tries to redefine things like time, light, gravity, even reality itself in pretty surprising ways. It's suggesting maybe we just sort of mislabeled things from the start.
Yeah. So our mission here is really just to unpack what this motion theory, as laid out in the source, is actually saying. What are its core claims? What does this reset actually look like?
Let's jump in. The absolute central claim, the big one, is everything we thought we knew was based on a misunderstanding of motion. That's huge.
It really is, and they don't waste time. They immediately get into what they call the collapse sequence. Basically, how rethinking motion makes all these other concepts tumble like dominoes.
Okay, so where does it start? Time.
Time, yeah. We're so used to thinking of time as, a dimension flowing forward, like a river.
Right, the fourth dimension.
But motion theory says, no. Time is fundamentally a measure of rhythm. Think beats, cycles, oscillations.
It's like a metronome.
Yeah.
Or atomic clocks.
Exactly. Consistent rhythmic processes. And if time isn't a dimension you travel through, well, there goes time travel, right out the window.
Huh. So what about things like time dilation? Clocks ticking slower near massive objects or at high speeds.
They reinterpret that. It's not time itself slowing down. It's a sync mismatch. Different rhythmic systems falling out of sync with each other.
Okay, sync mismatch instead of time dilation. That's a big shift.
It is, and it immediately hits the next domino, light. Light's speed is like the cosmic speed limit, tied intrinsically to time in standard physics.
So if time isn't flowing, light isn't traveling through time.
Precisely. And the idea of photons, these little particles of light zipping through space, that gets challenged too.
So what is light then, according to this theory?
They call it structured motion resolving locally. It's not a thing traveling, but more like a pattern or process unfolding right where you observe it.
Wow. Okay. No traveling photons, just local resolution of motion.
Yeah. Which then makes you ask, well, what is travel itself? If light isn't moving across space like we thought and time isn't flowing.
Then me walking across the room isn't really me moving through space.
It's described as more of an illusion or phase restructuring, like the overall pattern of you is shifting its configuration relative to the room's pattern, but nothing's actually traversing a static void.
Phase restructuring. Okay. That's tricky to visualize.
It definitely takes some mental adjustment. And it changes the speed of light. C. It's not a travel speed anymore.
So what is it?
It's redefined as a limit on the rate at which the structured motion can resolve. A sync rate? How fast the universe's underlying rhythm can update, basically.
A universal sync rate.
Okay.
Which must change how they view distance then. If things aren't separated by space, light has to cross.
Exactly. Distance isn't empty space between things. It's the sync resistance gradient between structures.
Sync resistance gradient, meaning?
Sort of like, how hard is it for the rhythmic patterns of two different things to influence each other or synchronize? More distance means more resistance to syncing up.
Okay, that's very different. And gravity. That's usually about mass pulling on mass across distances. What happens to that?
Gone. Thrown out. No attraction, no force acting over space.
So what causes things to fall or planets to orbit?
It's described as convergence towards sync density. Areas where motion is already highly synchronized and dense tend to draw in less synchronized motion. It's not a pull, more like drifting towards harmony or coherence.
Convergence towards sync density.
Okay.
No force. Just a tendency towards denser sync.
Right. And if you've redefined time like this and you've redefined gravity like this, then the whole concept of space-time, Einstein's fabric of reality.
It kind of has to dissolve, doesn't it?
It does. According to the source, it vanishes. Instead of space-time, they talk about layered motion compression.
Layered motion compression.
Yeah.
Replacing the four-dimensional continuum.
Yeah. It's a fundamentally different picture of the universe's structure.
Yeah.
Based purely on motion and its interactions.
Okay, so this is a complete rebuild from the ground up. But here's something interesting the source brings up. Despite potentially having these fundamental concepts wrong, Look at what humanity's built.
Right. That's a really key point they make. They list things like GPS.
Which totally relies on relativistic corrections, including what we call time dilation.
Exactly. And telescopes seeing billions of light years away, lasers, rockets, even quantum computers, all built using our current models.
So the source acknowledges these models work, practically speaking.
Absolutely. They stress that our existing models, even if based on potentially wrong metaphors, were functional and useful. They led to, and this is their phrase, good results from bad labels.
And they say this success is worth respecting. It's not about dumping on previous science.
Not at all. It's acknowledging the ingenuity, but suggesting we might have hit a wall because the labels, the underlying concepts, were off.
Which leads to the why. If the old models worked so well for tech, why push for such a drastic reset?
Because of the roadblocks, the paradoxes. The big one being, the failure to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics.
The theory of everything problem.
Right. They argue that these deep problems persist because we're building on that flawed foundation, that misunderstanding of motion. We can't unify things because the basic pieces don't actually fit together the way we think they do.
So the argument is we need to fix the foundation to get past this impasse.
That's the core justification for the reset. Now, to really grasp this alternative, they provide this useful contrast, like a translation guide.
The what we thought versus what it actually is table?
Exactly. Let's run through a few. So we thought time was...
Well, time.
And motion theory says it's sync rhythm difference, the difference in beats between systems.
Okay. We thought light was particles or waves traveling.
They say structured motion resolution, the pattern resolving locally.
We thought distance was space between things.
Motion theory says sync fidelity threshold, how well things can sync up.
Speed, traditionally distance over time.
Becomes rhythm resolution rate, how fast the patterns can update.
Force, a push or a pull.
Reimagined as structured resistance, how much a pattern resists changing. Gravity, attraction between masses.
Now, convergent motion density, moving towards denser sync.
Okay, mass, amount of stuff.
Becomes resistance to rhythmic reconfiguration. Hardness to change the pattern's rhythm.
Fields, like magnetic fields spreading out.
Motion compatibility gradients, areas where patterns interact easily.
Charge, like positive or negative.
Redistributed sync imbalance. Unevenness in the sync.
And particles, the basic building blocks.
Finalized motion loops. Stable, repeating patterns of motion.
And finally, waves, disturbances spreading out.
Unfinalized rhythmic propagation. Patterns still spreading, not yet stable loops.
It's a whole new language, really. It forces you to ditch the old mental pictures entirely.
Totally. No more little balls hitting each other or invisible forces reaching out. It's all about patterns of motion sinking or resisting.
And the source tries to explain why we developed the old view. Why does it feel so intuitive?
Right, because things feel like they hit us, don't they?
Yeah. Exactly. Our senses give us direct, forceful input. They use the example. Light blinds must be particles.
Because bright light feels like pressure, like tiny things hitting your eyes really fast.
But motion theory counters. The sun overwhelms us with local pressure, not light speed bullets. It's the intensity of the local motion resolution, not tiny projectiles.
Okay, what about heat? Heat burns. Must be energy transfer. That feels right. Heat flows.
Their counter is heat is sync overload. The rhythmic activity is just too intense for the structure receiving it, causing disruption, which we perceive as burning.
Sync overload. Interesting. And the vastness of space. Galaxies look distant. Must be time delay, because we assume light took billions of years to travel.
But motion theory flips it. Galaxies exist for us because their structure still resolves, not because particles traveled billions of years.
Meaning the fact we can see them means our motion pattern is still coherent enough to register here across that huge sync resistance gradient.
Right. It highlights how our direct, everyday sensory experience might not be the best guide for understanding the universe at its most fundamental level. Our intuition can be misleading.
Which brings us to the promise of this whole approach. It sounds complex, but they claim it's actually about simplification.
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive at first, replacing familiar terms, but the goal is to remove layers, not add them. What are they trying to get rid of?
The source is blunt. No particles, no forces, no fields. No space-time.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty much the core toolkit of modern physics.
Right. So if you throw all that out, what's left? What's the absolute base layer of reality in this model?
It boils down to just one thing, fundamentally. Just structured motion.
That's it. Structured motion.
That's it. And as they say, everything that arises when it sinks, or fails to. All the complexity we see emerges from the ways these fundamental motion patterns synchronize or interfere with each other.
So the whole reset is about moving away from metaphors we built based on potentially misleading sensory input.
Like particles and forces.
And trying to build a new foundation purely on motion and sync.
Exactly. And if they're right, even partially, the implications for where science goes next could be...
Well, it's enormous.
Yeah.
New questions, new avenues for research.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the big takeaway for everyone listening is that motion theory presents this completely different way to look at the universe. It questions our most basic assumptions, time, space, light, gravity, and suggests it might all just boil down to structured motion and how it synchronizes.
Yeah, hopefully this deep dive has given you a good, efficient grasp of what this really challenging perspective is all about.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, something sparked by this source. If our understanding of something as basic, as fundamental as motion could potentially be this far off, what else are we taking for granted?
What other scientific truths might actually be built on similarly shaky ground, just waiting for a different perspective to come along? And what kind of new science, new tech might pop out if we started looking at reality through a completely different lens like this one?
That is definitely something to chew on.